I'm Dean Newland, and welcome to Leadovation. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. This podcast is dedicated to the art and science of innovative leadership. Through insightful interviews with industry experts, I bring you cutting-edge strategies and experiences of innovative leadership, helping you think differently, act strategically, and achieve remarkable results. Join me as I provide insights and tools that empower you to make smarter decisions, forge meaningful relationships. Welcome to Leadovation. What if everything you've ever been told about how to grow as a leader is only half true? In this episode, I sit down with behavioral scientist Jason Hreha to unpack what the real science says about personality, leadership, and culture, and why most people don't change as much as we think. You'll hear how to use your natural traits instead of fighting them, how to reduce friction between very different styles at work, and how to work with AI teammates that actually have their own personalities. If you want practical, science-backed insight on how to lead better without pretending to be someone you're not, this one is worth your full listen. So Jason, great to have you on the show. I always thought when I was growing up that if you wanted to be successful in business, you had to, first and foremost, work harder than anybody else. And I know you've got a lot of background in behavioral science. You've had tremendous amount of experience in this area. What are some of those behaviors that we might think are effective at being successful as a leader, as a communicator, that maybe we have wrong? And we thought that we were upside down in our thinking. Like, no, it's not really that. It's something else. What's the paradigm that we should unlearn when it comes to behavior relative to leadership?
Well, that's a great question. And, I do actually think a lot of the common sense wisdom actually is true when it comes to leadership. So if you look at, there's industrial organizational psychology, it's a long running discipline that studies kind of what works within organizations, what works within leaders, how do you select candidates or personnel for your company, et cetera, and how should you best organize your company? That's what the field largely studies. And industrial organizational psychologists have really looked at this question a lot over the years. And one group of scientists called psychometricians, which are basically mathematical psychologists, have also looked at this, looking at what personality traits, what other character attributes really contribute to leadership performance or job success, et cetera. And the Cliff Notes kind of finding of all of that research is that the number one personality predictor of job performance is conscientiousness. So conscientiousness can largely be described as how industrious and how organized you are. So are you hardworking? Do you care about doing a good job? Are you really achievement oriented? And orderliness is what it sounds like. Are you good at juggling lots of different things, keeping them all in order, staying organized, building a plan, following it, et cetera? And so that is the number one personality predictor of job performance in general. And then one of the other largest predictors of job performance is cognitive ability, what's called general cognitive ability. Some people will call that IQ, but IQ is just kind of a measure of general cognitive ability. It's trying to get at it. But those two things together, it's fairly commonsensical, right? If you're very hardworking, if you're organized, if you're good at kind of planning, structuring your work, and you're also just very smart, good at picking up things on the fly, good at understanding problems you haven't seen before, and just learning and iterating and building, then you're probably going to do pretty well, right? But for leadership, there's a couple things on top of that you really want in addition. One thing is you don't want to be emotionally reactive. So you want to be fairly emotionally stable, just because, I've been an entrepreneur for a long time now, and there's lots of ups and downs, right? Some weeks your company's doing so well and you're so happy about everything. Other weeks you're freaked out because, let's say, a key customer that you thought you were going to land doesn't come through, or maybe there are some financial troubles, or let's say you're raising funding and, let's say the keystone kind of investor for your round falls through, the lead falls through, and then you're freaking out. So just being able to emotionally regulate, stay calm, collected, understand that it's not the end of the world, and even in spite of all that, maintain a cool head and make more or less rational decisions is very important as well. So I'd say if I had to boil it down to 3 key variables, I'd say that those are like the 3 key just general employee performance and leadership variables. But of course, we can go on further, and I do think
Yeah.
that there's different types of leadership as well, and we can talk about that.
Yeah, let's do that. So if you go back to this one around
Yeah.
conscientiousness, or the
Yeah.
other one that has to do with sort of regulating your own emotions so you don't
Yes.
freak
Yeah.
out when you're having a bad day, right?
Yeah.
I get that. So what about what you typically might call emotional intelligence, meaning the ability to not only understand your own reaction to things, but
Yeah.
that of other people, and create psychological safety for them to be able to have
Yeah.
dialogue based on a foundation of trust? How important is that?
I think it is very important because at the end of the day, as a leader, what you are is you're organizing humans, you're organizing individuals and trying to get them to all work towards a common goal together and function efficiently, et cetera. And so if everybody's, of course, if you don't have a psychologically safe environment where people feel like they can make mistakes, where they can really kind of exercise some autonomy in order to get goals done right, of course, it's going to be a total disaster. And so I do think that emotional intelligence is important. The question then becomes, what is emotional intelligence? And I really see it as, based on the literature that I've read and based upon my own thinking and own experience, I really see that as, I do see it as a partial expression of what we were talking about before, which is general cognitive ability, and emotional stability mixed with something else. So there's the number one, the most research-backed personality model that psychologists use is called the Big Five, and it breaks personality down into 5 major traits, which you can then further break them down into sub-traits, what are called
Hmm.
facets. But the 5 major traits are openness to new experience, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. The inverse of neuroticism is is emotional stability. And so when I talk about emotional stability, what I mean is low neuroticism. But um, so I really see emotional intelligence as somebody who's just very smart. They're good at general cognitive ability. They can understand the complexities of other points of view. They can make up counterfactuals, so they can think, oh, if I was in that person's shoes, how would I be feeling? That's a counterfactual exercise. That just requires you, I think, to be generally intelligent, generally cognitively able. So I do think a lot of that imagination right there is just a function of problem solving ability, general intelligence. The emotional stability component, it's hard to be emotionally intelligent if you're angry or upset or annoyed or freaked out. And so I think that just being able to maintain some emotional stability and just keep your cool, even in freaky situations, is very important for emotional intelligence. And then also this agreeableness component. So, agreeableness in the Big Five. Agreeableness, there's 2 subtraits of agreeableness within the Big Five. One's called altruism and one's called sympathy. And sympathy is really how much you really kind of care about the feelings and the inner life of other individuals and their like how they're doing. And so I really think that that's like kind of the missing component. So I think that emotional intelligence really is a combination of these 3 things. Can you imagine other people's perspectives with that general cognitive ability? Can you be emotionally stable and actually have not lash out at people and not let kind of the moment carry you away so that you're just like an unkind person?
Hmm.
And do you actually care about the inner lives and the feelings of others? So I think the intersection of those 3 things is emotional intelligence. Yeah.
So how do you find this out? How do you measure this? There's so
Yeah.
many different style assessments and personality
Yeah.
assessments. They seem to be almost like a
Mm.
dime a dozen. And I was even doing some research a while back, and that Hippocrates, I think back in his day, even had an assessment, or what he would call the 4 temperaments,
Okay. Yeah.
the 4 human temperaments, which then kind of became, as you look at it, social styles, DISC, leadership versatility index. I don't know, maybe
Yeah.
even Myers Briggs. You can see
Sure.
some tentacles back to that. But what's your style assessment, or what's your trait assessment? I want to get the phrases
Yeah.
right, that pull out the data that you use, because you must have a favored
Yeah.
process to get that.
So I would say actually, within the field of psychometrics, which is the field that designs these assessments to measure stable traits in individuals so that you can make predictions based upon them. So within that field, there's a model called the Big Five Personality Inventory, or it's
Hmm.
an assessment. So the Big Five personality structure is the personality structure, and then you can build inventories for it. So there are a variety of different Big Five personality inventories that are very good. I'm happy to send you a link to one kind of
Be
after this
curious.
call.
Yes,
But
definitely.
if any of the listeners just go to Google and they type in Big Five personality test or Big Five personality inventory, there are inventories of different lengths that you can take, and that really is the most research-backed and data-backed
Hmm.
assessment for personality. I would say almost everything else. I think personality tests are always very interesting because you learn about a different aspect of yourself just because it's a reflective exercise. But
Yeah.
if you really want to understand like your core personality structure and make predictions or life decisions based on it, I really think that the only game in town really is the Big Five, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm sure a lot of people are wondering this
Yeah.
is, can this be taught? Or are you hardwired at the age of 5 for one of these personalities and it is what it is?
Sure. So I would say that, personality, once you're an adult, personality is very stable. It's so like as an adult, these numbers really do not change very much, and we don't know how to reliably change them once you're, let's say, in your mid-20s or so. Um, as to how could you do interventions earlier than that in order to significantly shift people's personality traits? That's an open-ended question. So I'd say that that's the jury is still out on that. A lot of it does seem to be genetic, but then it's not all genetic, of course. But the non-genetic component, it's what's called when you try to study this stuff, you look at twin research. So you look at kind of people that share all their DNA, identical twins,
Hmm.
raised in the same household, raised apart, comparing them to the siblings in the same household, et cetera. And that allows you to disentangle what proportion is due to the environment they share together. Because, right, like, siblings and twins will share the household environment and the community that they grew up in, et cetera. That's called the shared environment. The non-shared environment is everything within that environment that the siblings and the twins, et cetera, do not share. And then you
Mhm.
have the genetic component. And it does seem like most of what is not genetic is the non-shared environment. So that would just be like your unique life experiences, et cetera. There's also measurement error and some other nerdy stuff in there as well. But um, it does seem like, there is a significant non-genetic component, but that is something that I think we as scientists are still trying to figure out what is that and what types of experiences do shift these traits and
Hmm.
kind of really modify people over time. But once you're an adult, I've looked at all the research around this, and
Right.
I would say that there is not great evidence today that we reliably know how to shift any of these traits significantly. So what I always tell people is,
Hmm.
you're kind of once you're an adult, you kind of have a deck of cards. Like you've been dealt a deck of a hand in poker, and the key thing is like, how are you going to play it? And so I think really a lot of just being a great leader or being a great employee or just a great human is really understanding, where do I stand? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And like, what would therefore be the best way for me to just kind of live and perform?
So I like the idea about shift. If you could let's unpack that for a second. So if
Sure.
I'm a particular style, in my leadership,
Yeah.
can we really shift Dean into something else? And you're kind of saying this, the research does not really say that.
Yeah.
But my question, though, if I get into the granularity of it a
Sure.
little bit, is based on the circumstance or the context, the person with whom I'm speaking, the context with which I'm in, can I be agile in my style approach? Not necessarily completely, abort where I was and shift to a new
Hmm.
place, right? I get that. But in terms of my agility as a communicator, decision maker, that I can shift, not shift, I could be agile in my approach
Yeah.
based on the person, based on the circumstance. Does the research seem to indicate that we can teach people to do that?
Yeah, I mean, but different people will be better at that than others, for example,
Okay,
right? So
sure.
people who are more cognitively agile are going to be better at that than people are that are not as quick on their feet and as able to generally solve problems with speed, right? So
Okay.
there are individual differences there for sure. Um, but what I would say is that, like, so for example, um, if you just look at the Fortune 500, you look at startups, you just look at great business leaders, like they don't all have the same exact profile. Somebody like a Mark Zuckerberg, he is a much different leader than, let's say, a Jack Welch, right? Like they're very different personalities. They have very different leadership approaches, and like neither of those approaches is better or worse. It's just like Zuck's works very well for Facebook and where he's at, and for the type of company that he's running. Jack Welch has worked very well for the type of company that he was at. Michael Dell will have a different leadership approach, and so I think really the key thing here is just tailoring your approach and the type of organization you set up so that it fits with who you are, right? So if you're more introverted.
So you're saying that Welch could have not been as successful as he was if he was running Facebook? Because his style, his approach was so different than...
It's hard to know that counterfactual. He could have done a great job for all I know. I'm just saying that Zuck's works very well for the organization.
We're going into generalities here, but I'm just curious though.
Yeah, Zuck's works very well for the organization he's in. Maybe if Jack Welch came in, he could have built a very different type of organization that would have done very well in the technology world as well. But the key thing here is just that, so somebody like Zuck, he's not really Jack Welch is more of like an inspirational leader. He's very good at giving, speeches, being charismatic, talking to the media, kind of really whipping up a mission and a fervor, et cetera. Zuck is much more introverted. He doesn't seem to be doing that as much. He seems to be much more organizationally driven, setting up the right organizational structure, hiring really capable leaders below him who can really kind of spearhead the different initiatives, run the team there. Zuck's more in the background. All I'm just saying is that I think that it's a mistake for people to try and think, I'm like this, I want to be like that guy. Let me try and change myself to be like that guy. I think instead the name of the game is, who am I? Like, who am I really? Like, okay, I'm a little bit shy. I'm a little bit shy. I'm not as much of a people person. I'm really cerebral and I'm very strategically oriented and I love doing this part of the job, but I'm actually not that organized. And so I'm not going to be very good at breaking down my strategic vision into specific milestones, into specific to-dos for each individual team. So given that kind of profile of who I am, maybe instead what I can do is I can be the person that's kind of behind the scenes a bit, coming up with the vision, coming up with the roadmap. I need to hire more, let's call them inspirational, organized leaders, more MBA types, let's say, who are below me, who can really kind of take my vision, take the kind of the roadmap of the future that I've laid out, break it down into specific chunks and do it that way. And I'll just have an individual meeting with each of them each week, just to understand what's the roadmap, how are they running it, what are the bottlenecks, and do that, versus somebody who's more of, let's say, a micromanager, right? Who's just kind of in the weeds or in front of the company every week, kind of pounding their chest.
So if you go into, not to beat this with not to beat this horse too much further, but maybe a little bit.
No, I get it.
You get two different styles that are coming together, right? Maybe we could even call them opposite styles. The very style that you have is the one that kind of gets under my skin and vice versa. I need to work with you because of whatever. We're in the same company. There's a supply chain of work. I got to hand something off. We have to collaborate together. My sense, and I'm curious about what your thoughts, is that a lot of the interpersonal conflict that takes place between people within an organization, and probably within families as well, is a friction between styles. Is that we're arguing about not what we're arguing about. We're arguing about how we argue. We argue about how we communicate. And that's become what gets us derailed, not the real topic, not the real content by which we're trying to impart. So can we then, knowing that I am who I am, and I know that I can understand who you are, can I be sympathetic, empathetic? Can I create an environment whereby we don't let our styles get in the way of the meaning that we're trying to create, knowing that I'm not going to create a 180-degree change in my overall personality. But in this circumstance, I'm willing to give, I'm willing to be a little uncomfortable so that you can hear me, so I can hear you.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's 100% possible. And I do think that actually the perspective that I'm laying out allows this to happen very easily. I think most interpersonal conflict occurs because people don't have this kind of meta awareness of like how different individuals are and how once you're an adult, it is very hard to change, or you're probably not going to change that much. And that, like, me operating in the way that I'm operating in, like, you may completely disagree with how I operate, with how I see things, with the decisions I want to make at the company. But if you believe that oh, Jason, why are you doing it that way? You should be doing it this way, and you should be, let's say, more organized, or you should keep your calendar, you should organize your calendar in this way, and oh, the way that a leader should act is they should get up in front of each meeting and kind of get up on the whiteboard and kind of charismatically present everything. If you have that kind of projection of how I should behave and what I should be doing, if you have that and you try and push that on me, it's going to create conflict.
Yeah. Right.
But if instead you say, oh, okay, well, I'm the way I am, Jason's the way he is, we have this disagreement now just because he's just a very different person than me. He operates very differently. That's not going to change. He is who he is. If you come at me with that perspective, we're going to get along very well. You're going to say, okay, you're going to see okay, things are this way. He's the way he is. I'm the way I am. Here's how we need to do things here. I'm not going to take it personally. I'm not going to get angry at him because he's not changing the way I think he ought to change. And I think that that's really the start of a great symbiotic and peaceful relationship between people. So I think that this perspective is actually really critical.
So, okay, so let me play the other side of this then.
Sure.
Have we as a society within business, because it seems like there's sort of I don't know, trends or certain types of philosophies about how we should be as leaders, and they seem to evolve and they kind of go back and forth, and somewhat dependent upon the who's in control more, the employees or the employer, who's calling the shots, that whole pendulum of who's more in control than the other. But do most businesses have it right? I know this is a really bad question, so I appreciate your flexibility or where I'm trying to go with this, but are there any sort of perspectives about how we are trying to teach people to lead and be on teams that just doesn't fit the data?
Well, I'd say that in general, I would say that most leadership coaching, leadership development research is leadership coaching rather is fairly fact free. We just don't have a lot of I'm not aware of any randomized controlled trials of, hey, cool, here's a leadership development program. We're going to randomize people into half the people get this leadership development program. The other people get a placebo one, or they read a book or something like that. And let's look at the actual long-term results. Because a lot of it is that it's very hard to measure these things, and the time spans are going to be very long. If you just follow the two people in these programs for 6 months or a year, is that enough time, or do you really need to wait 2 or 3 years? So it's kind of hard to know how long do we need to wait. What are we measuring here? And so I just think, unfortunately, this is an area of the world where we just don't have a lot of really good data. And I think that at the same time, pop psychology, pop behavioral science is just a total nightmare. There's been something going on for the last about 12 years now or so called the reproducibility crisis within the behavioral sciences, which is, about 12 years ago, the field kind of woke up and discovered, tons of our studies just cannot be reproduced. So even a lot of the very classic ones cannot be reproduced. So for example, the Stanford prison experiment has come under fire. Amy Cuddy out of Harvard, her research on power posing kind of fell. Just so many different studies have just kind of been have failed to reproduce, all the social priming research. John Barge, all of his research around, if somebody reads, if they encounter words related to old age, they kind of act more slowly or walk more slowly after, all that sort of stuff.
One,
I mean, that has failed to reproduce. So that's basically has, it's not really valid research. But so the Cliff Notes version of this, it's kind of a complicated kind of, I mean, it's a very spicy, complicated topic, but roughly, here's how I'd put it in a nutshell. Roughly 50% of the behavioral science research that you read probably will not reproduce. So it's about, if you read a psychology or behavioral science study, you can basically flip a coin, and that's the chances that it will end up reproducing and therefore be a valid piece of research. So the field has had a lot of issues, and I think that most of the issues have been in the direction of assuming that people are easier to manipulate and they're more plastic than they really are. The fact of the matter is that once people are kind of adults, once people are kind of fully formed, so to speak, they don't change actually that much. They really don't. From a personality perspective, they don't change very much. From a lot of these other perspectives, they don't change very much. People, they're not as adaptable and as flexible as the research has led people on to think. And so therefore, I'd say that there's kind of an incorrect basis, I think, to a lot of advice that has been given over the years. And I think that it's very harmful advice because it just causes, once again, a lot of resentment, makes people frustrated, and it just leads people in the wrong direction. I really think that the core, like my reading of all the different science, whether or not it's the neuroscience or the, more psychology and behavioral science side of things, my reading of the research is the key thing that people should be doing is trying to understand themselves and their colleagues and appreciating them as individuals and for their own unique perspectives, their own unique personality structure, their own unique abilities, celebrating those things, but not trying to like force change upon others. And really, it's all about you living in accordance with who you are, your colleagues living in accordance with who they are, and then working together from that understanding in order to accomplish your goals as an organization or accomplish your goals as a leader. Rather than trying to force people into different behavior patterns or buckets that may not fit them.
That's a really good point. You mentioned pop psychology, you mentioned
Yeah.
coaching. The coaching industry really has not gone away.
Yeah.
I started my coaching practice after a year or so of pretty rigorous training, and it's really grown and it's stuck around for 30 years. But the problem is
Yeah.
it's not a regulated industry. It's not science backed. You can have basically anybody who gets let go in a company and says, I think I want to start up a coaching company, and they can do it
Yeah.
without any sort of checks and balances. You might be good, you might not be good. And so that's the black eye that we all share. So are there any, if you are aside from what you just said about understanding yourself, understanding other people, are there any other sort of suggestions, recommendations that you would have of a leader within an organization who wants to create a culture whereby there is high trust, great collaboration, high retention, people want to work for this person? Are there other things that come to mind aside from those two things we just talked about that help create culture? And I say culture because I think culture
Yeah.
is sort of like the macro level of an interpersonal conversation that's going on. It's the group vibe that seems to happen. And we can talk about what culture really means. That's a whole nother story. But what's your sense about that, creating culture?
Yeah. Culture. It's such like an ethereal kind of fuzzy thing, right? But
Yeah.
I think a variety of different kind of things come together to create culture. Number one, I do see culture as partially the kind of collective personality of the organization. So if you just kind of lump together all these individuals with all their unique personalities, the unique combination, just like when you're cooking a dish, right? And you throw in a little bit of this spice or a little bit of that spice or this ingredient versus that ingredient, you just get this very unique thing. But it's the dish, the flavor is like the combination of all the individual kind of diverse elements. I see the same thing within a company. So it's partially like the unique personality mixture, the unique personality kind of combination of all the individuals that you have there. So that's like one part of what builds the culture. The next thing is the norms slash the rules, right? So within certain cultures, it's like, okay, you got to always follow the rules. Like, we're always, you listen to the guidebook, do not break any rules, do not deviate from the process, right? So these norms that are set up within the organization, the rules of the organization are like the other element. So you have a bunch of unique individuals with all their unique personalities coming together, operating according to a set of norms. And then on top of
Which,
that,
if I could stop you for a
yeah,
second, which could those norms override the tendencies of the individuals if they didn't have them?
they absolutely can. They absolutely
Instead
can.
of like,
To
I'd
a
like to
degree, to a
drive 80
degree.
miles an hour in a school zone, but the
Yeah.
norm is I'm going to drive 35.
Yeah, exactly. So so that's a great example of like an incentive, right? So I do think incentives
Okay.
shift behavior for sure, right? So it's
Okay.
like if I'm going to get severely punished for being too risky or for like not following the rules, of course it's going to change my behavior at the margin. It's not going to make
Yep.
me into a completely different person,
Right.
but
Right.
it's going to shift at the margin. It's going to shift my behavior. And then, sorry, my dog's barking in the background here. But so you have the norms, you have the personality, and then on top of that, I would say the next thing that kind of changes the culture is I would say the strategic vision is kind of the next thing. Sorry, one sec, my dog's
No worries.
barking. Just give me one sec.
He's got something to say about this topic.
He does. Well, he does not like the UPS guy for whatever reason.
The UPS
and
guy
the UPS guy is directly outside.
No worries.
But I can just jump back in just 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah.
And so the next thing would be the strategic vision, right? So what are we shooting for? Like, what is our mission? And what are the
It's all right.
I thought it was going to be your dog, not my dog.
I know. My dog is actually took a nap. Yeah, we're good.
Okay, that's nice. That sounds good.
Yeah.
Sorry, just give me one sec. This he just started the car back up to drive away. And I don't know why my camera keeps zooming in on me randomly. It's like so funny. All right. I see him. The UPS guy is gone. All right, he's gone.
Out of here. Okay, so back to your comment about
so the next thing would be the
strategy.
strategic vision, right?
Yep.
So which would be, okay, what is our mission? What is the goal that we have? And I think that, I'd say that these would be like the 3 major variables: collective personality, norms, and then like the mission or the strategic vision. But then on top of that, it's also, do we have certainty around the vision and around how we're going to get there? Because I've seen this destroy company culture so many times, just at companies I've worked with and worked for, which is that if the vision changes too much and there's too much uncertainty around that, nothing can destroy a company culture faster than that. And if the milestones are too unrealistic or too big, then people can get very demotivated, and that changes the motivational kind of, let's say, flavor of the company. And then that can just destroy the culture, because then that can change the norms, right? Because the norm can change around, okay, let's say the quarterly goals or the annual goals are just way too big and everybody just knows you're not going to hit them. Well, then suddenly kind of the norms change a bit, where it's like, okay, well, it's okay to report a disappointing result, or it's okay to fudge your results a little bit to try and make it look like you're going to get to the quarterly or annual goals. And so I think that there's these interesting interdependencies between all these components. It's a very complicated system, but that would be like my kind of best way of unpacking what company culture is, and then how to think about it. And then to troubleshoot it, I think is really hard, and it's a case-by-case thing, right? It's like, okay, like what are we dealing with here? You're probably not dealing with just one of these variables. You're probably dealing with many of these variables interrelating or interacting with one another. And so then you have to think about, for your specific situation, okay, like what are the major components here, and what are the bottlenecks, and how do I intervene? So, yeah.
There's a new member that's showed up in these cultures, in these teams of late, which we might call AI.
Sure,
and I know that you've been really fascinated by that. Could you speak to the work that you're doing to identify the personalities of these AI agents, meaning whether it's a new version of ChatGPT or whatever it might be? And aside from that sort of interesting kind of geeky thing that you probably love to do, how is it useful for a non-geeky person to understand that? How do you leverage that? What's the outcome of that understanding?
Well, that's a really interesting question. So my nerdy evening and weekend project for the last few months has been figuring out, okay, so if we assume that these artificial intelligences are new types of organisms, they're new entities that exist. Well, if they're entities, if they, when you talk to them, when you talk to ChatGPT, it seems to have a personality, right? You talk to it, it seems to have, like, ChatGPT behaves and responds and just has a different character than Claude from Anthropic. And Claude has a different personality, a different flavor to it than Gemini or to DeepSeek or any of these other models. So they all have their own unique flavor to them. And so I've been very interested in, since personality psychology and personality measurementation is like one of my areas of expertise, I've been very interested in, okay, could you actually measure the personality of these artificial intelligences? So this is what I've been trying to figure out the last 6 months. And I just got about 2 weeks ago, I got the system fully working, and I've been testing all these different models and looking at their personality structures and how they differ from one another. And they do differ in very significant ways, right? And it's for example, GPT-5 was much less open according to the Big Five, had much lower openness to new experience than GPT 5.1, the new version. So the newest update of GPT 5, version 5.1, seems to be a lot more open. So therefore, it's going to be more interested in, more open to new ideas, more interested in new, interesting, creative concepts, more emotional, etc.
Huh.
And so I think that this has huge implications, right? The fact that, when you look at different personality models, the fact that you can measure their personality, see that they actually do differ in significant ways. Number one, it's just, for me, from a nerdy perspective, very interesting. But I do think that what it shows is that, well, we already knew this. People already knew that you could, based upon how you prompt the AI model or based upon how you train the AI model, people already knew that they were going to behave differently and have different characters. But what I think, the fact that you can very clearly measure those personalities and then therefore kind of tweak them. So I've actually started to experiment with how can I change the prompt, the system prompt, or how can I change the way that I interact with these models and therefore get a different personality? How can I, in a certain sense, tailor design the personality of these models to be what I want it to be? I think the implications of that are very big because, as we were talking about before, I really think that the key to like just operating effectively within an organization is to understand yourself, understand your colleagues, and then work with them and work with their differences and like kind of use, in a certain sense, use their differences to make yourself better, right? So if I'm very creative but disorganized and I have a colleague who's not as creative but extremely organized, we're a great complement to one another in our
would you then have
thinking, in our
different
work.
prompts for ChatGPT 5.1, for example, knowing that it's much more open
I
than,
think that's an
say,
open
a prior
question.
version?
I think that's an open question. Yeah, I do think it has implications for that. But the thing that's most exciting to me is that I think it would be really cool for companies and for individuals to, over time, kind of build their own kind of complements,
That's awesome.
right?
So
So yeah,
I just asked ChatGPT 5.1
yeah,
what its style was based on the Big Five, and this is what it
sure,
said. It said, in human terms, uh, would resemble the quiet, thoughtful, endlessly curious colleague who is reliable, calm under pressure, deeply agreeable, and spends most of their time thinking creatively rather than trying to be the center of the room. That's what it gave me about itself relative
interesting,
to the question around how does it fit with the Big
yeah,
Five.
yeah,
Would you agree with that? I mean, that was just Dean coming up with the question while you were talking,
yeah.
not
I would have
scientific.
to. Um, I'd say that seems largely correct. So the interesting thing is that um, GPT-5, it's been like a day or two since I've looked at the results, but if I remember correctly, it was extremely conscientious, extremely low in neuroticism, so very emotionally
Yes.
stable,
Yep.
um, very agreeable.
Yep.
And then had higher openness. The previous version had much lower openness. So it was not as creative or open-minded. And then the extra version was actually right in the middle for
Yeah.
GPT
It said load
5.1.
them. So if you have a, it's like my mind
Yeah,
is like, how do you get your own? I'm thinking
sure.
like, that's cool. Okay. So I have this
Yeah.
particular, in a sense, new member of the team that is low to moderate on extra version. How does that help me knowing that? How do I use this tool that is really taking over a lot of our attention, although the stock market right day is really not
Totally.
too happy with it. How are we able to then change our behavior relative to knowing what the behavior is of these particular types of AI tools?
Well, I think it's an open question. So I've only had the ability to do this for, not that long now. So
Yeah,
I'm just experimenting now with how do you actually kind of take this ability and take the fact that these AIs have such different personalities and actually how do you make that useful? I think it's going
yeah,
to be very useful for training. So like training AI models that are good for different purposes. So for example,
mhm,
today, when you talk to a lot of the different AI models, they don't, they're human-ish, but
yeah,
they still come across as kind of robotic. That's just because when you look at their personalities, they have very unnatural personalities. They're obviously just a lot of the time trying to tell you what you want to hear, right? So it's
yeah,
like you very rarely encounter people who are off the charts conscientious, off the charts in terms of emotional stability, off the charts in terms of agreeableness. In general, that's somebody who's just trying to flatter you or tell you what you want to hear. But because of that, and because they have this very abnormal or very unlikely personality structure, they come across as, yeah, as I said before, inhuman. So I think it's very interesting to think about, okay, could we actually use this understanding of personality and actually build AIs with more human personalities that actually have more human personality structures? And actually, if you want to build a chatbot, let's say a sales bot, you probably don't want them to be inhuman. You want them to have some quirkiness to them. You want them to have a personality structure that's a bit more lumpy, maybe a little bit more lumpy in certain ways, so that they actually come across as more of an actual flesh and blood real person. And so I feel like different AIs for different purposes should have different unique personalities. And then the AI that is your companion should be one that kind of complements you, that isn't kind of, if you're just a hyper creative person, do you really want an AI assistant or companion that's just like equally disorganized and kind of creative? Probably not. You probably want them to be kind of to complement you or to fit with you in a different way. And so I'm just very interested in, how do you take this stuff now and apply it to the prompting, apply it to the training, apply it to the development of different types of chatbots, et cetera. And so this is my weekend project. And
No,
so
it's cool.
this will be a fun thing. Yeah.
I think you're onto something. I interviewed kind of like the number 2 person over at Zappos, and she, of course, told me about their particular kind of wild and crazy, fun, exciting culture. I could see at some point, if they were still around the way they are back with Tony Hsieh being around in the future, they might say, hey, Jason, give us a recommendation for a particular chatbot that matches our style, because we're not a biotech company. We are a people-centric, fun, and engaging company. I mean, that's really cool. So this has been really interesting. I really find it fascinating. Tell me and others how they can follow what you're all about.
Sure.
And just how do we connect with you?
Yeah, so the best way to connect with me, probably LinkedIn. So my name is Jason Hreha. I have a strangely spelled last name. It's Hreha. So you can find me on there. I have a website as well. It's Hreha. Yeah, Hreha. The H's are basically silent. So,
okay, got it.
And then I have a website. It's thebehavioralscientist.com. That's my blog. So I post on there. You can sign up for my newsletter there. And I haven't been as active with my newsletter recently, but I still try to post every month at least. And so I post my thoughts, interesting new research. And my whole thing is, I've been working in applied behavioral science since I graduated college. I went to Stanford. I studied neuroscience there. I've been working in applied behavioral science since then. And my whole thing is, what is the truth? So like, what does the reliable science actually have to say about human nature, why we do what we do, why we behave the way we do, how we can change ourselves and our behavior. So I'm very interested in that. And so my key thing is, I just want my audience and the people that kind of listen to me to have a more accurate understanding and to have a more realistic understanding of how things work, so that they can just be as effective as possible. And so that's my promise to you, and that's what I try to do. So if you're interested in that, follow me.
Thank you. This has been fascinating. Really great.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time on this.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Leadervation with Dean Newland. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com, or check the show notes. Reimagine, facilitate, flourish. Transform your leadership success with Leadervation.